and gentlemen, welcome to Retro Warriors episode 427. Woo! As always, I'm your host, Justin Baker, and as always, I'm joined by viable human Chris Saturn.
Right as we paused for a moment before we started recording, so we always have that moment of silence to let Pablo edit it.
Commemorate what we're about to do to people's ears.
Yeah, right as we paused there, I shifted in my chair, and my chair made a loud fart noise. So, Pablo, if you could isolate that noise and just use it anywhere you want, that'd be
Make
great.
it louder.
Yes,
just
please.
Enhance. Enhance. As far as housekeeping, I was at a concert last night.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of screaming. And usually when we record the shows, by the end of it, my voice is giving out.
That's true.
So if it gives out early tonight and anyone notices, then that's why I was doing a large amount of screaming last evening.
It was a Scream Rock concert.
Yeah, it was audience participation only Scream Rock concert. It's just a guy that plays guitar and everyone shrieks as loud as they can.
One time I saw Jonathan Colton live, and he was doing that song, All We Want to Do Is Eat Your Brains.
Yeah.
And he insisted on the crowd doing the zombie bit while he did the rest of the song.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we get to that bit the first time, he just stops in the middle of the song and he says, "Hold on. I was able to hear every word you guys just said. You're supposed to be zombies. Do you think zombies can enunciate?" Yeah, so he made us do it again several times until he couldn't understand anything we were saying, to where you're just like, and then he resumed the song.
You know, that's dedication to the bit.
Exactly.
What that is.
Yep.
My week.
Yes, sir.
I think I hate free time.
I believe you. Yes.
What has occurred? I've been playing Baldur's Gate.
Yes.
And
the first one, right?
Astute listeners will remember that I quit Baldur's Gate. And Saturn, you're correct. I'm playing the first Baldur's Gate. Were you joking? Because I am.
I was.
No, I am. I know it's shocking. The host of a retro game podcast went back to play the old game.
Is it the enhanced edition or the original?
So I own the enhanced edition on GOG and Steam. And I learned that the console ports have a different control method. Because I like playing these games with a controller. And one of my issues with the older Baldur's Gate games, so 1 and 2, is that whole BioWare CRPG kind of style of like dragging and selecting all your party members and moving them around always felt really tedious to me. And I always it just gets kind of annoying just literally navigating around on maps.
Right.
Because what happens is it turns into this thing where I load into a map and I'm like, great, I need to go to this place. So I open the map and I go click on like the blacksmith, and then I click to navigate my party there, and then I'm just staring at a static still screen until my party eventually meanders that way over to the blacksmith. And I know it's a dumb and weird complaint, but I just always found interacting with those games to be kind of tedious. Yeah. But the Switch port, and presumably the other console ports, let you do this kind of like they have a name for it in the computer RPG space, like it's like a driver mode or whatever, where basically my left stick just moves my character.
Oh yeah, nice.
And all of my party members just kind of stay in line behind him like Pikmin, just sort of getting whipped around as I make turns.
Like the extra party members in every Dragon Quest game.
Yeah. And so I've been playing it because I find that control method much nicer. And also, while certainly it's not as fast to... I don't know. I just like controllers. I like using controllers for games like this. I really enjoy it. And I've found myself greatly enjoying the first Baldur's Gate to a degree that I have not before. Playing it on my Switch with a controller. Also, just having it on Switch in general. It's a very big, expansive game, and having it portably... Especially when I can play it on my Steam Deck, but on my Steam Deck, I've got to use the touchpad as a mouse, right? There's no... And it's just... You can do that. It works, but for a game with as much dragging and clicking as Baldur's Gate, it's kind of tedious.
It really frustrates me when they add new control schemes into console ports and then don't backport them into the PC versions or vice versa.
Yes.
It's the same thing with the Pixel remasters. Why the hell is the mobile version touchscreen only and doesn't support a gamepad?
It makes no sense.
Right.
So I have been playing Baldur's Gate. I'm getting a good ways into it. I would say I'm gaining an appreciation for it that I didn't have before.
Nice.
I think especially coming from Baldur's Gate 3. because Baldur's Gate 3 is very micro.
Oh.
Well, it's also horny, yeah. Although they patched some of the horniness down a little bit, yeah. It's a slightly less horny. It's still pretty horny. But in Baldur's Gate 3, I was complaining about the tedium of combat. I was one of my complaints was that combat just takes a really long time, and it's kind of tedious, and it's a lot of micro actions. And I personally, this is an opinion I have, not stating a fact, but I personally feel like the 5th edition D&D system adds to the tedium as compared to like Divinity Original Sin. Yeah. In older Baldur's Gate games, you can control your other party members, but they have reasonable AI turned on, so they'll just kind of do their own thing. So yeah, I don't even actually control any party members. I just walk them into combat. I tell them what to target, so as soon as I see a bad guy, the game pauses, and I might select a couple, like, all right, my ranged guys, I want you to target this dude. And then my melee dudes, I want you to target this dude. And I've got them in little groups I can quick select.
Nice.
And then I just unpause and watch them do all of the actual thinking part, right? So it's my job to just sort of equip them appropriately, be aware of their skills and their equipment and what they have going on. And every now and then I'll be like, oh, I really do want to cast color spray or whatever, so I'll go manually cast that. But for the most part, the AI in the enhanced editions is pretty smart.
Nice.
As long as they can see their opponent. And so I've been having a good time kind of getting to back away from the micro of the combat and just sort of enjoy running around the world doing D&D stuff, right? Nice. And so it's been nice. I had forgotten how these older BioWare games really kind of the interacting with the tediousness and the technical details of D&D combat was kind of optional then, right? Like, I'm tempted because I'd started playing Baldur's Gate 3 with my wife just because I spent money on it. I want to get some fun out of it, and I'm struggling to. And we started a split screen campaign, and she was like, instantly had no idea what the fuck was happening. And I had to basically explain the entirety of 5th edition combat to her because the game doesn't do a good job of explaining it. It kind of assumes you know how D&D works. But I think I would be curious to see her play Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 because
they automate
the game, it kind of plays itself, right? You don't really need to know much. Like, you need to know enough to, like, all right, I can go open my skills menu and see that my guy's real good with long swords, so I probably want to give him a long sword.
Right.
And I want to put armor on him. But other than that, it just sort of does it. Granted, I'm playing on easy, maybe harder difficulties. Like, people are probably like, Justin, you idiot. It's absolutely a tedious micromanagement game on normal difficulty, but I'm on easy. Not story difficulty, easy. So there is some amount of challenge. I have died 50 times. But I think it's a good game for the Switch. It's a good fit for the Switch, and I'm really impressed with how they added full controller support for a game that extremely was not built for it. Nice. I mean, to kind of a ridiculous degree. Like, it is as mouse driven as you could get, and they really they kind of I guess borrowed or maybe it's the other direction, Larian's thing of there being this sort of radial menu. So it makes use of radial menus, which are very, very useful. But I'm having a good time with it. I picked it up. I wanted to get it physical on Switch, but Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 physical on Switch is unobtainable.
It's exorbitant.
It's exorbitant when you do find it. It's very expensive. So I got it digitally because it was on sale for like $15. Nice. And then I picked up the Planescape Torment / Icewind Dale double pack for like $30 physical. So I've got that. I'm curious if Neverwinter Nights, because Neverwinter Nights is another game I really enjoy, but interfacing with the game is just a little tedious, you know. Although Neverwinter, I believe, lets you move with WASD if you want.
I believe so, yeah.
If I remember correctly. So it feels a little more action-oriented. I'd be curious to see what the Switch port of that is like. I'm tempted to pick it up, but I don't want to bury myself under games any more than I already have. I'm already up to my neck here.
Are you sure you don't? It increasingly seems like you might.
What I've realized happens is new games all come out at once.
Yeah.
And I get excited.
That's been happening for years.
And so I know it's frustrating. And so I'll buy 2 or 3 new games, and then I'll feel overwhelmed, and then I'll go back and play old games and not play the new games.
Then you'll buy old games.
Right, and then I'll buy old games because I'm like, well, I want to go play those. So Baldur's Gate 3 came out. I wasn't going to get it, and then I did get it, and then I had problems with it, and now I'm playing Baldur's Gate 1, which I already owned but had to buy again. I'm sensing a pattern here.
Yeah. I have a problem.
So yeah, anyone like me who you try to play these older, CRPGs, and you're like, it's good, but it's just kind of tedious to sit there and do it with a mouse. I can already feel the like CRPG diehards, like, how do you find this more tedious than a controller?
Right.
I can already feel it down in my bones. But I do. I just do. I think what it is I'm pretty quick at learning fast button combinations.
Yeah.
So like I can once I learn the radials, because they're fast in this game. Everything's very snappy. Because it's a very old game. It runs totally fine on Switch. I can snap through the menus pretty fast.
Right.
Whereas like Baldur's Gate 3, there was a little bit of a delay. You couldn't really snap through the radial menus really, really quickly, because they just kind of just animate and just sort of shift around a little bit more slowly, if that makes sense.
Well, I'm glad to hear that Windows 98 game runs well on the Switch.
I was a little dubious, but it worked out. It worked out. Saturn, what have you been playing?
So I'm still picking away at Sea of Stars, but I'm going pretty slow because lack of time. But and also I don't want to. I'm in that situation where I know that it has good writing and it has a sizable story. It's a JRPG style game, so it's going to have plenty of dialogue. So anytime that I sit down, I look at the clock first, and I'm like, do I have time in case I happen to come across a cutscene? No, I'll play this later. And so I keep putting off a lot of it. And instead, going towards smaller bite-sized experiences. So I decided to try Loop Hero finally.
Oh man, that's a fun game.
It is.
That's a real fun. That's a really good like chill second monitor game,
right? It's also a nice little. I only have 20 minutes and I'm going to be interrupted 3 times during that time kind of game.
Yeah, for sure.
And I am appreciating that specific aspect of it because I can let it run while I'm listening to people bitch about FedEx labels on a conference call and still feel like I'm doing something even if I'm not looking at it the whole time.
I like kind of chill, I don't want to say idle games, but maybe semi-idle games like that.
Yeah.
I wish it was more, because like idle games are a thing.
Yeah.
But I don't want the pure idle game because most of those are just free to play trash. I just want a game that's like, it just kind of runs and it's chill, but I still get to interact with it and make decisions and it's good. It's tough. I was really addicted to a game called Cookie Clicker for a while. I don't know if you remember when Clicker games came out.
Also an idle game.
And this, Loop Hero is a lot of fun. I picked that up on GOG when it came out, and it was cool.
I think that's part of why I like turn-based games. I still have full control over it, but when it is my turn, everything stops and waits for me. So I don't have to worry about getting distracted. I don't have to worry about dying while I'm doing something else.
I can't. I'll whip my phone out in the middle of a cutscene that's boring. Yeah. But if I'm in combat, I'm in combat. Like I'm in the tank and I'm doing my strategic thinking, and I don't like to have a break from that. I want to see that through. Basically the inverse, I presume, of how you play.
I have had games like usually I try not to stop in the middle of combat, but I have had situations like when I was playing. It was one of the Cold Steel games, 3 or 4. I had gotten real sick one night and was still trying to play the game because of course I am. And I realized that I am just so tired that I can't pay attention anymore, but I'm in the middle of a boss battle that took me a long time to get there. So I just turned off the TV and went to bed. And when I woke up, I was like, where was I in the game? And I turn on the TV and it's like right there in like turn 75 of a battle. Yeah. And so I had to remember 1, what I was doing, 2, who was even in my party, and I managed to pull it out, but it was disorienting to just
I'm real bad about
like that.
With turn-based games doing that thing that sometimes I'll do with books where you'll read like 5 pages and then after 5 pages be like I retained none of that.
Yeah.
I was just physically viewing words.
Right.
I stopped reading 5 pages. You have to go back.
Yeah.
Or usually that's you being like I should stop. I'm either distracted or tired or whatever. Right. But I'll do that with turn-based games where I'll like be somewhere and then I'll be like, what the fuck? Where am I? What is happening? Why am I here? What is going on? I'm just following the motions, you know.
And that also happens to me in games that have a bunch of side quests, especially if the side quests are boring as shit.
Yeah,
I'll just like hammer through the dialogue and all the side quests because they are so boring, just to knock them out and get whatever rewards they have. And then when I go back to the main story, I've gotten myself in the habit of just hammering at the button. And then I'll be like 7 dialogue boxes in. I'm like, oh shit, I've been forgetting to read any of this. I have no idea what's happening anymore.
All things that we'll be talking about later. Let's do the news.
Yes, sir.
First up, Take-Two found to still be using hacked versions of Manhunt 2, Max Payne 2, and Midnight Club 2 on Steam. Thank God for piracy.
Right.
Otherwise, we clearly wouldn't still have these fucking games.
Yeah, and I believe they were also selling hacked versions of GTA 3 and Vice City and San Andreas before they pulled those versions to put up the new ones.
Great.
And we've known about this for a while, but they had patched it at one point and said they weren't using the hacked versions anymore. And then somebody discovered that while the exe file that it was using is not the hacked version anymore, the hacked version is still in the same folder and is accessed during gameplay. So,
great. Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, it's Take-Two. They don't have the
just a tiny company
to make their games not be reliant on piracy that they try to get screw the consumer over.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. Certainly not.
Retro Game Challenge 1 and 2 are getting Switch ports in Japan. No word on international release. God, I would love to get international releases.
Yeah.
The problem is the second game was never officially localized.
Right, exactly.
So that would be it is pretty big ask.
And also the first game was localized by Exceed, if I remember right. And
I think so, yeah.
And both games were made in Japan by Bandai Namco. Mm-hmm. So there's a rights issue there too. So if Exceed wants to localize the second one and release it, they have to get the rights from Bandai Namco. If Bandai Namco wants to localize it themselves, they either have to localize both games or purchase the localization from Exceed, and it becomes a big mess. So I'm not expecting an international release, but man, that'd be nice.
It'd be so cool. Good. Rumors point to GTA 6 releasing at $150. Hold on, for the standard edition.
Yeah.
Holy fucking shit, man.
So I'm thinking either they're floating this number now so that when they do release it at 90, they can be like, well, at least it was 150.
Yeah.
Or they're really considering releasing it that as the test. Like, can we make some games worth way more than other games? If anybody can, it's Grand Theft Auto. So we're just going to put this out there and see what you guys do with it.
Let me tell you what the defenders of this price point are going to say. And for people that don't believe me, there will be defenders of this price point if it is true. They're going to say exactly this. They're going to say, well, it's basically 2 games, right? You've got GTA Online, which is its own separate thing, and then you have the entire campaign. So that's like 2 $70 games. You know, that's about $150. Right. That's the defense you're going to hear for it.
I've also already heard the defense that if you look at prices of games in the early 90s and adjust for inflation, it is $150.
Of course.
But we don't have that kind of money to be spending on games right now, so I don't care.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
The following games have been added to Nintendo Switch Online: Kirby Star Stacker, Quest for Camelot, Downtown Neketsu March Super Awesome Field Day, and Joy Mech Fight. So lots of new Nintendo Switch Online games.
Now, 3 of those are imports. Star Stacker we had only gotten on Game Boy, and that Kunio-kun game we didn't get it might have been in that collection. I don't remember.
I believe it's in the collection. I think that's the one that's it's just a collection of a bunch of different little sports mini games. And if I remember right, there's a foot race one in there that's fucking hilarious. But you know, they're still trickling them out. Yep. Maybe one day they'll have as many games as the Wii Virtual Console that they shut down. That'd be awesome.
And Joy Mech Fight, I've always been told, is the best fighting game on the NES.
Oh, really? Better than Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighter
is what I am
NES
told.
port? Wow,
Yes,
that's not shocking at all, because TMNT Tournament Fighter sucks on NES. Cost of PlayStation Plus in Turkey goes from 400 lira a month to 2,350 lira a month, which for the mathematicians out there is a 600% increase.
Yeah, and people are not happy, obviously.
What?
I did see
really?
Back in the summer, before all the Reddit stuff shut down, there was one dude who had posted that he was worried that they were going to raise the price in Turkey due to inflation. And so he bought like 23 years of PlayStation Plus and added it to his account. Like his account said like expires 2048 or whatever.
Yeah.
And everybody was making fun of him. Like, whatever, dude, you should not have spent that much money. And then when I saw this headline, I was like, oh, I bet that guy felt real smart today.
Probably. Aonuma says no Zelda Tears of the Kingdom DLC. In a very rare confirmation of no content from Nintendo. Normally they just don't say anything. Kind of weird that they would come out and be like, no, we're not doing DLC for this game. Also kind of weird they wouldn't do DLC for the game. I thought all the DLC for Breath of the Wild was really good.
Maybe Trails of the Kingdom didn't hit the sales numbers they expected it to hit.
I can't imagine that's even possible.
Right. It does feel like people aren't talking about it as much as they talked about Breath of the Wild, though.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's just a byproduct of it being a lot of the same assets, a lot of the same engine. They added a ton of really great stuff.
Yeah.
But I'd say it's less of a revelation as Breath of the Wild was.
Right.
Breath of the Wild, it was like, at least for me, I mean, I know you have different opinions about it. But it was so different that I was like, this is something, like this is important.
Right.
Tears of the Kingdom is like, well, yeah, it's more of that. So thumbs up. There you go. You know,
right.
It's a refinement, right? Where was I? Nintendo and Google rumored to be working on a VR headset.
You remember that one headline that someone posted for that was "Forget the Switch 2."
Yeah, forget the Switch 2. Fuck it. Who needs that trash?
Let's get the Virtual Boy 2.
Fucking future. God, please call it the Super Virtual Boy. I'd be so happy.
I hope they do a Virtual Boy Virtual Console on there.
Also, guarantee you this is not a thing.
No. And if
Don't
it is,
it's
just something behind closed doors that'll never become a thing.
Or I could see it being a thing where like, oh, Google's working on a VR headset and Nintendo made some kind of like special title for it or something.
Yeah, like a Pikmin Go style thing for it.
Yeah. SAG-AFTRA considering striking against video game industry as well to protest AI appropriation of actors' performances. So for people that aren't following the writer strikes, this is just kind of
a actor strike.
Yeah, but it's the same. It's all the same striking.
Right. It's part of the same
multiple
event.
Industries and facets of industries are striking right now.
Yes.
And so this is kind of more of that,
right.
And more power to them,
right.
Because it's bullshit. It's all bullshit.
Yeah.
Mega Bloks is selling a Mega Xbox 360 kit for $149.99.
Yep.
It is a 3/4 scale console, controller, and a copy of Halo 3.
It's pretty adorable.
It is very adorable.
I don't know if it's $150 adorable, though.
The NES was $300.
Yeah, and I didn't buy that either.
Yeah, Mega Bloks also makes a big, giant Mega Bloks Castle Grayskull that I keep almost getting. But then I'm like, what am I going to fucking do with... When I was a kid, my brother was way into Lego.
Yeah.
And he had all the castles. He had like all the big, giant, full-size castles. Mm-hmm. And he'd get them and he'd build them and he'd put them up on this shelf in the top of his room where I was not allowed to touch them. And they never got played with. They just got built and then looked at like models. And I remember years later when he moved out, we took them down and they were caked in like so much dust. And that was the moment where I was like, I guess I don't really get the kit thing. Like, what do people do? Do you do for Lego people out there? Do you just display them? Like, what is, what do you?
There's a woman at my office. Well, she's not in my office, but at my job who does Lego at a tournament level, which I wasn't aware was a thing.
It's like a speed thing? Or?
No, it's competition. And they will like give them like restrictions, like you can only use these types of pieces or from these types of sets or whatever, and you have to make something that meets these specifications. And she won the U.S. Lego Championship a few years back with a I think she said it was a 5-yard square recreation of Halloween Town from Nightmare Before Christmas.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ.
She showed us some pictures of it, and it is fucking enormous and intricate.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, where did you find the time for that? And she was like, like 30 minutes a day for a year or two.
I mean, I played with Lego growing up, but it was like, all right, we got a kit, and we build it, and you look at it for a minute, and then you move the bits around, and then you smash it apart and build other shit. Like, this is how we...
Yeah,
I'm not my brother,
I don't have the
obviously.
creativity to do it, so I would just follow the instructions.
And then finally in the news, we have the Unity debacle, which I'm just going to kind of fire through here.
Yeah.
Unity Plus subscription has been eliminated, which means smaller devs will have to pay multiple times what they're currently paying for their license, which is bullshit.
Yes.
But this is the real straw that broke the camel's back.
Yeah.
Unity will now charge a runtime fee per installation. Mm-hmm. This is user-end installation of each game, and backs that up by saying they have telemetry tools that can track each install, which is both bullshit and discerning from a security perspective as a consumer.
Right, because I want to know where they're getting that information.
And then thankfully they later backtracked, but only to say that they'll only charge one install per user. But also admitted that they have no way to differentiate between pirated installs and legit installs, so this means two things. One, developers are going to start getting hammered with fees for their installations that they didn't prepare for. And for bigger corporations, they can probably just absorb it. But for small companies that built a Unity game on the back of Kickstarter funding and are already operating on slim margins, this is enough to break some indies.
And also, there's the concern that there's going to be the people, the same gamers TM that get upset about any little piece of inclusion in any game.
Yeah.
When they get upset at a game that uses Unity, they can just pirate it and install it on a million virtual machines and charge that developer for installs that they didn't sell. So now suddenly they owe more money than they actually made on the game.
And even if it is a thing where it's a fraction of a cent,
it's 20 cents per install.
Holy shit!
Yes.
What the fuck?
Uh-huh.
That's a lot, man.
Yeah.
Imagine if you had a game that, like, you sold 1 million copies.
Yes.
Fucking
And
Christ.
imagine those people install them on 2 or 3 computers each, and somehow Unity's telemetry doesn't recognize that it's the same user.
What this also means is that this move has the potential to be extremely damaging to preservation because... if you are not maintaining the game for, say, the 10 years you have it on Steam, and maybe you're not really getting sales, but you want to keep your game up because you sold, a couple 100,000 copies. It was a big thing back in 2015 or whatever.
Right.
You top some charts, and now it's just kind of you sell one every once in a while. It's just a thing you keep out there.
Right.
Well, now all of a sudden you're going to be paying more fees.
Yeah.
And it becomes a thing where people will start taking their games down rather than get hit by these fees because they're not getting the sales to compensate for the fees necessarily.
And they said that it retroactively applies in such a way that they only start charging you once you've had 200,000 installs of your game. But if you've already had 200,000 installs before this goes live, you start getting charged on day one. So for companies that have their game has been on the market for 10 years already, then come January 1st, they start getting charged for every install, even if they're not making any sales anymore.
So make no mistake, this is disastrous.
Yeah.
On several fronts. So for anyone that maybe doesn't fully understand or thinks it's getting overblown, no, this is big. This is real big. Unity is a big deal.
Yes.
So let's fire through the rest of this. When pressed on how small publishers are to pay for install services like Game Pass, Unity said Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo will be responsible for paying any installs on their consoles, which just further pushes these corporations to restrict consumer capabilities.
Yeah, and
because they don't want to fucking pay it.
Right. And did anybody ask Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo first if they were okay with installing this? And if they are responsible for paying these fees because they are the distributors, then what about Epic or Steam or GOG or the Android, the Google Play Store, the Apple App Store? Why wouldn't all of those equally be responsible for it?
Yeah. Oh, but it gets worse. CEO John Riccitiello sold 2,000 shares a few weeks ago.
Right, but
he owns millions of shares, so who fucking cares?
Right,
but people keep reporting on it.
Yeah.
Unity's offices, because now it's shitty in the opposite direction. Unity's offices were evacuated after receiving death threats from an employee. Massive Monster, developer of Cult of the Lamb, says they'll be pulling their game from distribution to avoid having to pay the fee.
Right.
Unity will not make any guarantees that pricing won't change further without notice, which is so hateful.
Yeah.
And they will also charge the fee on demos that can be upgraded to the full version, even if the user never pays to upgrade.
Yeah, I just don't get... Did they clear any of this with their legal team?
You know, I think this is just... this is a great example of the rights violation creep that EULAs and TOSs have been slowly evolving into over the last 20, 30 years.
And this is
just a perfect example of we've been slowly sliding down this slope, and all of a sudden someone said, hey, we can fuck everyone with all of this and make a bunch of money.
Well, let's put blame where it's due, because John Riccitiello, the CEO of Unity, used to be the CEO at EA back when SimCity 2013 came out with its always online bullshit.
Yeah.
He was also in charge of Spore releasing with the you can only install this software 5 times before you have to buy another license for it bullshit.
Yeah.
What is his hard on for counting the number of installs of a game?
What makes me mad is the giant developers who are just going to let this roll off their back that means that they're going to see a huge influx of cash from this move.
Well, also, I think a lot of these, even the larger developers, are probably going to move away from Unity because there's other options.
Over time, sure. But right now, Unity is going to see a cash influx, and this is now we're just getting the problems with like corporate America and C-suite level bullshit of like, hey, we can show you growth now. We're going to get that growth by any means possible. We can't guarantee it in the future, even though you're going to demand it. But look, we made growth happen. Unity probably was sagging or stagnating or just not infinitely growing enough. And they said, well, we can make growth. And then whoever made that decision is just going to fucking cash out on their golden parachute before it, comes crashing down. We need to get to the topic at hand. I can talk about this bullshit all day. It infuriates me.
Yeah.
But let's get to the topic at hand, which is Chrono Cross.
Yes.
Which is
not developed in Unity, for the record.
It's not developed in Unity, which is the air quotes sequel to Chrono Trigger. As far as scope, this is going to be a 2-part episode. This episode will cover development and gameplay, and we're going to do our best to avoid spoilers.
Right.
So if you have not played the game and you're not super nervous about maybe having some little things kind of, mentioned, then you should be good on this episode. But next episode, we're going whole hog on the story, and it's a big hog. So
it's a weird hog.
It's a weird hog.
Halfway through, it stops being a hog and is something completely different. I don't know what it is.
But then it turns back into a hog.
Oh, yeah,
later.
It turns into sausage.
We will... We will have to spoil some things out of necessity, but we're going to keep them very minor.
Yes.
As far as release information, this was developed and published by Square for the PlayStation 1, came out in November of 99 in Japan, August of 2000 in North America, which you'll notice is kind of late for a PS1 game.
Yes. The North American release was just a couple of months before the PS2 released.
It re-released with some upgrades and the Radical Dreamers visual novel attached in April of 2022. This is the Radical Dreamers edition that we've, people have probably seen around. Yep. As far as first encounters, this was a game that I always kind of saw floating around my friends' PS1 shelves, and it was always kind of casually regarded as that one, like, non-Final Fantasy RPG. Because you got to keep in mind, by that age category, people my age, being a few, I'm 6 years younger than you.
Yeah.
And so we got into JRPGs with Final Fantasy VII. We were that crop, right?
In fairness, most of my generation did too, just because they ignored them before that.
This was the weird game. This was the we know JRPGs to us are Final Fantasy, and this is that one that looks kind of like Final Fantasy, but it's definitely not Final Fantasy, and I think it's a sequel to a Super Nintendo game, but my friend told me it doesn't have anything to do with a Super Nintendo game, but then my other friend said it does, so I don't know. So
well, Chrono Trigger was also released on PS1 shortly before this.
Yeah.
So
I started it a few times. I got bored. I just never bothered to delve much deeper than that. It felt super bland and confusing. And then for the show, I played the game in 4 days.
Because you're insane.
And let me tell you, that was a trip.
I remember 4 weeks ago when you said, "Hey, let's do Chrono Cross." And I'm going to start the game right now. And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do we could push that out further. We don't have to do it right now. And you were like, no, I think I can do this. And then this week, I was like, are you sure you want to do it? And you're like, yeah, I'm almost there. So,
I got about 5 or 6 hours in. And then just could not be fucked.
That beginning of the game is so dry and slow.
And then in 4 days, I crammed out the rest of the game. And let me tell you, I was delusional by the end of it.
That's intentional.
It was, man, it was a lot of game.
Right.
In 4 days. It was fast, very fast. What about you, Saturn? First encounters?
Yeah, I'd pre-ordered it because I was a big Chrono Trigger fan. I was a big Squaresoft fan at the time. And I had a PS1. So all these things lined up. And so I got it day one, and I played it enough times in a row to unlock all the characters and get all the endings and everything. And then I put it on my shelf and was like, I'm going to come back to that someday. And that hasn't happened yet. And every time I have tried to, I get like 2 hours in and I'm like, this is very dry, and I am struggling to keep going. And then I just put it down for a while. So I eventually I'll get back to it.
There's a point early in the game, we're not going to spoil it here, but there's a point early-ish in the game, hours-wise. I mean, it's not early as far
about
as
a quarter
several
of the
hours,
way in.
But it throws you a curveball. And from that curveball on, I was like, all right, I'm in it. Let's do this. But it
takes a while to get there. It's a slow ramp.
Shit. It's the saltine appetizer before your steak dinner.
Right.
One time I accidentally bought unsalted saltines.
Oh, no.
How are they even allowed to call them saltines anymore? But that's what the first several hours of this game were for me.
Man.
Was the oops, I bought unsalted. They're just teens, right?
Yeah.
I mean, why is it called a saltine?
What a flavorous lump of dough that must be.
My 90s 2-minute stand-up routine aside, Saturn, tell us about the lead up and development into Chrono Cross.
Well, first, before we get to Chrono Cross, we have to talk Chrono Trigger and Radical Dreamers.
Right.
So Chrono Trigger, we already did an episode on. It was released.
Did 2 episodes on.
That's true. We did a 2-parter on that. It was released in Japan and North America back in '95, and it was developed by the quote unquote Dream Team that was Hironobu Sakaguchi and Nobuo Uematsu from Final Fantasy, and Yuji Horii and Akira Toriyama from Dragon Quest.
Yeah.
And despite the fact that those big 4 were the ones that took most of the credit and were also used for the marketing, a lot of people contributed to the game. It wasn't just the 4 of them hammering out a game.
Right.
Notably, you had writer Masato Kato, who assisted. You had artist Yasuyuki One and composer Yasunari Mitsuda. And they all also did a bunch of other work at Square since then that was relatively successful. However, they did feel that the game's world and story was left somewhat unfinished at the end of Chrono Trigger. I disagree, but
I'll say this about Chrono Trigger. It really does give you just enough of everything to feel like you got the experience to the point that I kind of almost could have done for more of it, but I don't know that I would have ever classified it as incomplete. Right. I would say it left me wanting more than I would say that it was incomplete for sure. There's definitely moments where I'm like, man, I'd really love to explore a little bit more of some of these territories.
Yeah.
It's interesting that they felt that way, but then Chrono Cross.
What's weird is I feel like me and Masato Kato were on completely different terms there because we both were like, we need to have more of Chrono Trigger, but I was thinking I need more of this game because the game is so great, and he was like, I need more of this world, but not any of the characters.
Yeah.
And also only, not any of the parts of the world that we discussed already.
Again, only tangentially the same world.
So yeah, it was Masato Kato who was the co-writer along with Yuji Horii for the original game. He had started working on something to tie up those loose ends, and that project became Radical Dreamers, which was a text adventure for the Satellaview, which was the add-on for the Super Famicom. And despite the fact that it was using all text and mostly still images and wasn't like much of a game, it still pushed the Satellaview's hardware to its limits. So many of the images had to be redrawn multiple times in order to fit the hardware limitations. And the story of Radical Dreamers was quite a bit darker in tone than Chrono Trigger, because Kato admittedly had a very nihilistic worldview at the time, he says. And he said that he didn't intend for that bleak outlook to encourage players, or he did intend, rather, for that bleak outlook to encourage players to pursue their personal dreams in life. Because when I think that the world is ending, I certainly want to experience my personal
guy that's
dreams.
like, nothing means anything, so pursue your dreams.
Right. It's weird.
There's a flavor of nihilism that is optimistic, but it's a very specific flavor. And I
don't know that he quite hit it in Chrono Cross, but anyway.
Nope.
So they did have relative freedom on Radical Dreamers due to its very small budget and scale, but they also had a very tight production schedule, and they had to finish the game in 3 months. And he said that led to a lot of cuts, and they were unsatisfied with how it turned out. But then they got pulled into other projects and they couldn't do anything about it. And so they just kind of left it to sit there for several years. And then you get to actually Chrono Cross. So mostly the same team worked on Xenogears, or several of the people from that team anyway.
I didn't know this until I had finished the game.
Oh, yeah?
But you mean like, it was the Xenogears people. I'm like, that makes a shitload of sense.
Right? So you have, from Xenogears, you have producer Hiromichi Tanaka and also writer Masato Kato. And they wanted to follow up Chrono Trigger after they had finished Xenogears. And specifically, Kato was thinking back to Radical Dreamers and how he felt like he didn't get the story he wanted out of it. And specifically, he wanted to tell the story of Kid. He felt that she was an important enough new character that he needed to tell her story.
I have a lot of opinions about Kid. And zero of them make me want to hear more of her story.
So they decide they're going to make this game that is built out of Radical Dreamers, but is not just a recreation of Radical Dreamers. They also didn't want to retread the same territory that they traveled with Chrono Trigger, so they decided not to include heavy time travel at all. That was out. Because when you think of a game with the word Chrono in the title, certainly it has nothing to do with time.
It makes no goddamn... It's...
Like, if they had called it Dimension Trigger, that would have made more sense.
Like, I get that Kato worked on Chrono Trigger.
Correct.
But I'm pretty sure Kato hates Chrono Trigger. That's the only thing, after playing through this game, after doing, reading about stuff for this show, the only thing I can figure out is that they hate Chrono Trigger. It's the only thing I can figure.
Yeah, I feel like maybe that Dream Team had a lot of influence on Chrono Trigger.
And a lot of it is presentation. We'll talk about that next. But I agree.
So, the artist Yasuyuki Hone was brought back from the first game from Chrono Trigger, along with Nobuteru Yuki, who helped with character design, and they also brought back Yasunori Mitsuda from the original game to do the soundtrack, which is a stellar soundtrack, by the way. It's fantastic. And the initial plans for the game was for 64 playable characters and endings that would vary depending on which characters you used through the game, who they interacted with, and who was in your party at the end.
Like, these people had made games on the PlayStation before. They know what it's capable of.
And let's not forget...
even in the Xenogears... Guess what was a little too ambitious for its boots?
Yeah, they
just
ran out of
into
energy in Xenogears. Exactly. So they eventually cut it down to 45 playable characters, most of which have no impact whatsoever on the story.
There's a lot of fucking chaff.
There
is. That's a back of the box point. Let me tell you who was a mainstay in my party. Fun guy. He's a fungus man.
Yes, the fungus man. Yeah, he is. He was never a mainstay in my party. I can say that.
Oh, he was for me because I was like, he's too stupid to not be in my party for the whole game.
My friend's favorite character was Pip.
Okay.
And Pip is glitched in the original game.
Oh, Pip's the little dog thing, right?
Yes, and he can evolve into different forms.
Yes.
And he can become Angel Pip or Demon Pip, depending on how you use him. And my friend loved Demon Pip, but the game wouldn't save that demon status, and so sometimes he would just reset himself to regular Pip.
Yeah. Now, there are 3 final forms of Pip.
Yeah.
There's the Angel Pip, Demon Pip, and then there's a weird, like,
Pip.
middle Pip.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, continue.
Yeah, sorry. So they, in order to give all of these different characters their own personality, but to avoid having to write a script for 45 different characters in every possible scenario, they decided what they would do is just give all the different characters verbal tics or accents that would be applied on the fly based on a pre-written script.
Mm-hmm.
And so that way, no matter what scene you were in, the people in your party could chime in and add to the conversation, and it would keep their specific speaking style. And when they were localizing the game, the localization team was led by a guy named Richard Honeywood. He had
Old Dick Honeywood.
Old Dick Honeywood. I hope he's not listening to this.
Dick Honeywood knows, and he would probably enjoy.
So he had to further modify the system to fit English text, which contributed to the reason why they decided not to release the game outside of the US and Japan, because I can't imagine using this system to translate it into a dozen languages.
Yeah, for sure.
But it got really dumb with some of the characters.
It did, and some of it, like, the dialogue doesn't fit well with the weird translation of these, like, vocal tics. It just comes out strange sometimes.
The worst one is the dog Poochie. Was that? God, it's the worst.
I couldn't stand the Cha characters, Orcha and
they're bad too.
Korcha and like, why are they saying Cha? Why?
I don't know.
Why is it all caps?
Who was the guy that did all caps for everything?
Zoa. Zoa was a mainstay in my party just because he was screaming everything. It'd be like someone just died and he's like, "What should we do?" Fucking love Zoa. Funny as shit.
I always like to think of him as like a grandpa with a typewriter who doesn't know how to turn off caps lock, so he's just speaking very slowly and deliberately.
Yeah. My favorite is anytime you have Zoa and there is a some dialogues, like, you get to pick yes or no.
Yeah.
So Zoa, if he asks you a question, you can pick yes or no. The yes and no are in all caps too, right. Presumably because you're shouting back at him.
What will we do? Yes.
No. He's just screaming at Zoa. Anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, so the idea of the in-battle elements, which we'll get to when we talk about gameplay.
Yup.
Wasn't even considered until the team was developing the final battle.
Oh, you don't say. The weird-ass, half-baked elemental system didn't come in until the end of the fucking game?
And, of course, it is heavily used in that final battle.
Yeah. Okay. It's specifically used in the final battle.
It is specifically in the most awkward way used in the final battle.
And we'll talk about this final battle in the next episode, but literally, this final battle, I guarantee what happened is someone was sitting in the office and they're like, well, I want the final battle to be interesting, not just like an HP sponge.
Yeah.
What if this? And then they said, great, redesign the whole game to fit around this one dumb fucking idea.
I know you haven't played Drakengard.
Nope.
There's one of the endings of Drakengard that you can get, the joke ending. The whole game is a mix between Panzer Dragoon style riding a dragon and shooting at shit, and being on the ground Dynasty Warriors style. It's just those two games mixed together. That's Drakengard. If you can get to the final joke ending, it becomes a rhythm mini game, and it moves so fast that the internet has determined you just have to know the answer ahead of time and have it written out, because you can't see them in time to hit the buttons, because your correct answers light up the screen so much that the new ones are obscured. And I feel like whoever designed that might be the same guy who designed this element system.
I could see that. Yeah.
Anyway. So they claim not to have used any existing tools that Square had from any of their prior PS1 games, and that they developed.
They would have.
They developed everything from scratch for the game, including a system that could change the frame rate on the fly, which was really cool because that allowed the fast forward and slow motion toggles that were added in New Game Plus, as well as a method for reading the data on the disc in fast bursts that allowed everything to load with less load time.
Yeah.
Presumably because it still has a lot of load time on PS1.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an interesting development.
Let's talk presentation.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get the soundtrack out of the way. It's a good, catchy soundtrack. I'm not a soundtrack person, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good.
Except for Nicki's song.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. It's rare that a video game makes me cringe, but Chrono Cross did it a lot.
Yeah.
I want to talk about presentation because, one, I played this game on my OLED Switch, it's a very blue, green, cool colors, very vibrant game. It feels just
kind of tropical feel.
Color palette wise, it feels in kind of stark opposition to the like tans and reds and grays of Chrono Trigger.
Right, true.
Which I found interesting, you know.
So it depends on which time period in Chrono Trigger you're in, because sometimes there'll be different color themes.
That's true. But it's very vibrantly colored game. Yes. But and this is a thing that I notice a lot in a lot of PS1 era JRPGs. A lot of it is very humorless.
Mm-hmm.
And even the parts that are supposed to be very funny because of the presentation just aren't. They just aren't funny. And I was missing Toriyama's art so much.
Yeah.
Throughout this game in comparison to Chrono Trigger.
Yeah, I will say that the characters especially, despite their great variation in the characters, in their design, they still feel mostly lifeless to me.
Well, it doesn't help that it's all the FMV. They have these fucking doll's eyes. You know, it's that Uncanny Valley early 2000s, but still pre-PS2 era of like, everything looks fucking weird and say, like pale.
It's one of the best looking PS1 games as far as just from a technical perspective.
Oh, yeah.
Because everything is really well animated. All the backgrounds are, for PS1, nice and high resolution. It is one of the few games that utilizes the system's high resolution mode to display the menu screen at 480i, which has caused so many problems with so many emulators over the years when it jumps from 240p to 480i. But it is a pretty and technically very impressive PS1 game.
Yeah.
But as far as the personality of the art, I feel like it's kind of dry.
It's missing something somewhere.
Yeah.
It's so vibrant and colorful, but it's just, something's just missing. And I can't quite put my finger on what it is.
So annoying looking to me all the time. And despite her personality or her character or any of that, just her appearance feels really bratty and annoying to me. And maybe that's a personal thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I had a hard time putting my finger on it, but for such a really good looking and good sounding PS1 game, it just feels like it lacks character, which is weird to say about a game that has 45 of them. Right? You know?
Just the playable ones, not counting all the other characters.
But it feels like it's lacking some kind of character, some kind of visual personality that I wanted from the game. Just kind of isn't there. And I think some of it is just, it might partially be because there are 45 playable characters that it's so diverse that you don't feel any sense of cohesiveness between a lot of these designs. It's just, this is a fungus guy, and there's a dog, and then this guy is in bondage gear, and you know, and it's just, I don't know. It's
and they all walk together through a town.
It's that kitchen sink design where it's like, I don't get any kind of visual, congruity from these
now,
elements.
Ignoring the characters, thinking about just the world itself, I think it's very pretty and vibrant.
I think
they did a good job with that. Now, the modern re-release, the Radical Dreamers edition, looks kind of fugly just because they lost all the original art. So they up-resed it all through like a Super Eagle filter or something.
Yeah.
But on the original PS1, it looked really impressive and looked very nice.
The world is pretty small.
True. It's very small.
And it felt. I kept feeling like it was really small, and I don't mean just like the overworld. The overworld's extremely small.
Yeah. But
just the and I know we don't talk about games in this regard anymore, but when we're talking about pre-rendered background PS1 games, we can. There are not a lot of screens in this game.
True. Yeah.
Because this goes back to that design where since all the backgrounds are pre-rendered, you're effectively handed a screen.
Yeah.
And in the guide, because of the nature of the game, you go back and forth between places a lot and play through things multiple times. So the strategy guide I used, which was the original strategy guide, puts all of the maps for everything in the very back of the book.
Yeah. And
so they're all clumped together in the back of the book. And when you're actually back there flipping through them, it's not a very big game.
No.
They do a lot of retreading a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And sending you back and forth through places. And obviously, there's two versions of the overworld, minor spoilers.
Right.
But they're largely the same damn thing with the same damn maps.
Yeah.
And so
if there is any change in the maps, it's usually very minor.
Yeah. It just feels like it's not a very big game.
Right.
They really wallow in what they have, but it's
in theory, they took exact opposite approaches to the world and the characters, whereas they probably should have focused more on a handful of characters that they developed more and spread out the environment a little more so you had more area to explore in. It feels like they got that backwards somehow.
I kept waiting to go to the main continent they kept talking about.
Nope. No.
You know that moment in the JRPG where they're like, okay, now we're opening up the overworld, so now it's a bigger overworld or a second overworld, or we added a continent. It never does. I was like, is it never going to happen? Then I got to the end, and I was like, I guess not.
And what sucks is when they keep talking about the mainland, they're talking about an area from Chrono Trigger that people will know. That's the game that they remember. They want to go see what's going on over there. Nope. Never get to see that.
Let's talk gameplay. Because I want to say that this game is fucking confusing to play. And so I went and I watched videos about it because I wanted to understand it, because it's a very complicated system.
Yeah, we already said that this was a very ambitious game, and I feel like the gameplay is even ambitious for PS1 era JRPG.
So let me break down the gameplay. Combat is it's very different from any other JRPG you've ever played, probably before or since. It is centered around a stamina meter and an elemental grid. So the stamina meter, so each character can have an amount of stamina. It's a numeral.
Right.
Physical attacks up to 7. Physical
attacks
attacks
also go negative.
It can.
Yeah.
Physical attacks use stamina, and characters can make as many physical attacks as they have stamina for. You can do physical attacks level 1, 2, and 3.
Yep.
And so a level 2 attack has a lower hit percentage than a level 1 attack, but it does more damage.
Yes.
And it takes 2 stamina. So if you have 7 stamina, you could do 2 level 3 attacks and a level 1 attack, or 7 level 1 attacks. However you want to, combine that.
I always build up because their hit percentage goes up if you build it up first.
As your stamina depletes, it is regenerated by having other characters take actions. So you've got this sort of yo-yo effect between your 3-character party in these turn-based battles. And elements, which I'm going to explain next, will deplete stamina down into the red, into the negative. Because your physical attacks, whenever you don't have a full digit of stamina, you can no longer physical attack, you're done.
Right.
Elements are able to drain your stamina beyond 0 to the negative. So it takes you longer for you to regain enough stamina to take another action.
Right.
So it gives you a longer recovery time. So that's how the stamina meter works. This is how you build and use actions. This is the action economy of the game, right? Let's talk about elements.
Yeah.
Elements are in 3 sets of opposing colors. black and white,
Yeah.
red and blue,
Yeah.
and green and yellow.
Right.
And in each set, these two colors oppose each other. So red is weak to blue, black is weak to white, yellow is weak to green, etc. Elements are aligned on a grid that increases in power and decreases in quantity for each character. What this means
like a pyramid.
In lieu, in an inverse funnel system. In lieu of a magic or a tech menu option, you've got this sliding scale of elements. And your level 1 elements, you got like a bajillion of them.
Right.
And then level 2, you got a little less, all the way up to the high levels where you've got only 1 or 2 elements.
Right.
Because they get stronger as they go up.
Yeah.
In combat, physical attacks increase the elements you have available for casting by 1, 2, or 3 levels, respectively, depending on which attack you did.
Yes.
Which means, if I want to cast a level 4 element, I can hit an enemy with a level 1 and a level 3 attack, or 2 level 2 attacks, or 4 level 1 attacks, whatever, to raise my elemental level to level 4.
Yeah.
And then if I still have stamina left, I can then use a level 4 element.
Right.
And elements, despite the available elemental power level at the time, can only ever be cast once per combat. What this means is, let's say you have a heal element. You want to cast your heal spell. Well, you have to assign it to multiple slots in your elemental tree.
And they all have a base elemental level.
Yes.
So if you assign it to if it is a level 2 ability and you assign it to level 2, then it'll act normally. But if you assign it to level 3, it still costs 3 to use, but it is slightly powered up.
It's stronger. It'll say +1 next to it. Now, for people whose heads are already spinning, I'm almost done explaining because I have a lot of complaints, and you don't understand my complaints unless you understand
don't
this
the
shit.
items also have to be equipped to the element grid?
Yeah, we're going to talk about it.
Okay.
So this is the last weird thing, I swear. The field it's not. The field itself tracks which elements have been used by color. So the last 3 color elements are displayed in the corner of the screen.
Right.
So when you cast an element, if the field element display shows that element, then it gets a power boost. If, say I'm casting a green element, and of the last 3 elements casted, one of them is green, I'll get a power boost. If all 3 are green, I get a big power boost.
True, yes.
So, I think we've established that it's this kind of yo-yoing, raising and lowering of stamina effect to build up to these big actions. Right. And at the same time, you want to be aware of what colors you're casting and the order you're casting them in.
Correct.
And you also, characters have innate colors. So an enemy will be a yellow enemy. They're probably going to cast yellow elements. You want to use green elements on them.
And also, those innate abilities require certain elements to be locked into your element grid that are exclusive to that character.
So as this yellow enemy is taking damage, they're also increasing the power of their yellow attacks because they're changing the field element tracker, which tracks the last 3 colors. Anyway, beyond that, other complexities worth noting. You can trap elements by using items that match that exact element, which means going into a battle, you have to know this enemy is going to cast the green tornado element. So I went and bought the green tornado trap so that when they cast it, I can trap that.
Yeah.
There are summon elements that you can get. And the only way to use a summon element is if all 3 of the last 3 elements cast were the same color as that element, and they're assigned to a character that matches that element's color. Yeah. There are dual tech skills, which means if you have 2 characters that have enough stamina, and they have complementary skills that specifically match up with these specific 2 characters, they can do these big moves together.
It was just based on the dual techs from Chrono Trigger, but done in a much more complex way.
And all encounters in the entire game, including every single boss fight as well as the final boss fights, can be run from with a 100% success rate 100% of the time. You can run from any battle at any juncture in that battle and always get away no matter what.
Right.
And that sounds really cool until you learn why. So, we've explained it all.
It also sounds cool until you accidentally do it deep into a boss fight.
Oh, yeah, after you've used fucking items.
Yes.
So, due to the complexity of combat, there's a high probability I've totally missed or misunderstood some of these mechanics. I want to talk about level and gear, and then I want to bitch about things for a while.
All right, yeah.
Because I want to say this so far. This is an interesting system. This system has really cool ideas. I love the idea of the battle having this kind of flow back and forth.
Right.
And sometimes you'll burn out all your characters and you'll all go down into the negative, casting some big stuff, and then you have to regenerate your stamina. I love this idea.
Right.
It's a really awesome idea. It lends itself to strategic thinking. It lends itself to being aware of what element am I? What element is the enemy? What's the order in which I'm going to cast my things? It is a very strategic system.
Yeah.
Gear in the game, on the flip side, is very simplified.
Yeah.
It's just smithed. You don't purchase any gear. All the materials required for the best items in the game are acquired by casting various summon elements in combat.
Which is hard.
Very hard to do. So it all roots back. All the gear kind of roots back to combat. You don't spend a lot of time equipping characters. You really don't. They have 3 accessory slots, an armor slot, and a weapon slot, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's the most complexity. And the game also gets rid of regular traditional experience and leveling. They have a star level system.
Yeah.
So instead of regular experience points, boss characters increase your star level, which is basically a level up.
Yeah.
But it also gives you a cap for how far you can grow.
Yes.
So after you raise your star level, each successive non-boss encounter gives you a little bit more growth until eventually you've hit this soft cap. You can only grow this far at this star level.
And you don't always grow in every single battle. So you don't necessarily know if you've hit that cap until you've tried for a little bit.
But what that means is, in such a complex combat system, grinding is not only not necessary, it doesn't do anything.
Right.
You do a few battles after you reach a new star level, but then you're not able to grind unless you increase your star level by fighting bosses.
Unless you're trying to grind everybody.
Which I like. That's a cool idea. Except, don't you remember, you have to grind materials in battles to get the good gear in the game by casting summon elements. So I do have to grind. Still, you didn't get rid of it. You just made it arbitrarily complicated for no reason.
You just shifted it.
And allocating elements is tedious enough, but as you stated, all items in the game must also be equipped in these elemental slots on this grid. And so if you have a basic healing item, it has to be an element, it has to be allocated, or you cannot use it. And they're the only elements that you can use multiple times, as many as you have items for that element.
Yeah.
And it is fucking infuriating trying to decide between, do I want to have the items I have available, or do I want to have my elements? And what it results in is items aren't very important either. Everything is about this elemental grid.
Yes.
Everything in this game feeds into this elemental grid. And the game does a piss poor job of explaining the gameplay systems.
Well, how else are you going to buy the strategy guide, Justin?
The strategy guide. Up front, you're given a lengthy tutorial that's just way too much upfront information.
Right.
And then throughout the course of the game, they have these tutorial battles that keep coming up, but they're with these like slapstick comedy characters. And it's more concerned about being goofy than it is really making sure you understand these concepts. And it's the first time in my life I've ever wished a game just had a character I could talk to that had a series of in-game text boxes that I could be like, hey, explain what the fuck stamina is to me. Explain how the fuck do I use my items? I see no item function in my menu. Why do I have to equip it?
Does the old man not answer any of those questions back in the first town?
I mean, I don't know, man. I don't fucking know. Yeah. We haven't reached my complaint list. So this is all well and good. And this is one of those systems that is so complex that at first you're like, all right, I'm struggling with it because I don't understand it.
Right.
This is, because when you come to these really complex combat systems, a lot of it's, I was excited. I texted you, I remember. I was like, I think I understand the combat. I'm excited for this. This is cool.
Yeah.
But man,
I remember when this came out, several of my friends and I all got this at release. And we all pretty heavily had to lean on each other to figure it out. Like it was somebody figured out this thing, somebody figured out this thing. We looked up this thing on a message board on the internet, and this thing was in the strategy guide. And we had to share information just to figure out not like where the secret stuff was, but the basics.
Yeah. How does stamina regenerate?
Right.
It's the game doesn't do a great job of explaining it. And at first it feels like you just don't understand it.
Right.
But then the more you play, you start to realize that these systems just don't quite lock together in a way that works with the rest of the game.
Yeah, they're needlessly complicated and also not terribly necessary, because a lot of the stuff in the game, you can still just kind of mindlessly bash your way through and ignore a lot of these nice, intricate, sophisticated systems.
So when characters are removed from your party, either by swapping them or for story reasons, they do not unequip elements or items. Now, for items, it's not a big deal. Every character can only have a maximum of 5 items, 3 accessories, armor slot, weapon slot. But the elemental grid is basically a fucking spreadsheet that you will meticulously put together. Now, the game has an auto-allocate function.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier, each character has an innate color.
Yeah.
If you auto-allocate, the system mostly fills their grid with elements of their innate color.
Right.
That is the opposite of what you want. Because remember, for stuff to get good and powerful, you want to cast the same element successively. So each character needs to have a good mixture of each elemental color, because one, you don't know what you're going to encounter in the world and what innate color it's going to be, so you want to be prepared. Right. But then 2, say I've got a blue summon. Well, I got to cast 3 blue elements to make that summon become available for casting.
And hope that the enemy doesn't interrupt with a different color.
Yeah, and hope they don't interrupt with their own colors. So if one of my characters literally doesn't have blue on them, or only has 1 blue, because since the enemy can interrupt and change the elemental grid or the elemental field, I can't even get my terms right. If you've got 2 blue out there and they cast a red, you're like, oh shit, I need to cast more blue. I have to start this process of filling the field with blue elements all over again.
Yeah.
And if you have a character that's only got a couple blue elements, then one of your characters in combat is not contributing, but it also means, hold on, they can't cast their element, because then it's going to interrupt this chain of blues you're trying to make.
Yeah, that's why I mostly ignored the summons when I played the game.
But again, if you want to get the best gear in the game, you have to summon.
I just chose not to, because the second best gear was really good enough.
Yeah, the stone gear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my point here was that your elemental grids, you spend a lot of time assigning them, setting them up, tweaking them, adding to them, removing from them, misunderstanding them, coming up with strategies. You really dump a lot of time to this elemental grid, but the story requires that you change characters pretty frequently. It doesn't just have 45 characters. It has 45 characters, and you're going to use 10 of them.
Yeah.
But
the other 35 it doesn't care about.
The other 35 is nothing. In some of them, it's just so... When I remove a character from my party, they keep all of their elements. But by the end of the game, these elemental grids are massive, and I'm putting my most powerful elements in them. So now, what I hoped would happen was it would remember the placement of all of these elements, put them back in my inventory, let me use them, and then whenever I add that, something along those lines. No. It just stays on the character, so you have to unequip them. Yeah. Now you can unequip them one by one and leave gaps in your elemental grid, or you can dump it all. And then when you switch characters back, guess what? You're back in the grid menu. And the grid menu is annoying to navigate.
Yeah.
Just the UI for the grid menu is annoying.
It's a very 1999 UI.
Yes. And so swapping characters around becomes frustrating. And it's the thing you have to do a lot. And what happens a lot is, what this means is, sometimes you swap characters just because, if I swap this character and he talks to his other dimensional version of himself, I get an item. So you swap a character and you don't think about it. You run around town, you get the item, you go back out. Guess what? You're in a battle now, and you forgot to redo your elemental grid. This character has no elements.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden it makes sense why you can run from every battle, because being prepared for every battle is inevitably.
There's nothing worse than getting into a battle and looking down and seeing, like, because on the battle screen next to your HP is a little,
it's got a display.
Yeah, a little kind of a mini map version of the element grid.
Yeah.
And if you haven't equipped it, it'll only have like 3 things on it.
Yeah. And you're like, shit,
of varying levels, and you're like, oh no, what did I do?
So you're in the middle of a battle, and then you're like, oh fuck, man. Oh, I got this character. I got to redo his elemental grid. And then what if you're already in a zone at a battle? You can't change characters wherever you want. You have to be at a save point or on the overworld. So shit, now you have to figure out how you're going to do this guy's elemental grid on the fly for a character you weren't planning on playing with.
That's why not too long into the game, I got into the habit of just just equipping the elements that I absolutely knew I needed on a character, and then doing the autofill for the rest.
Yeah, so you can fill blanks, which is useful. Yeah. But by the end of the game, when you're really getting into it, you at least my strategy was, I had pretty complex strategies that used a lot of elements, and I needed a lot of stuff filled. It was just it became a slog. It was tedious.
Yeah.
So running from battle sounds super useful, but it almost feels like it's a thing they had to include because in the last final hour they decided to upend everything with this elemental system, and they were like, well, fuck, we can't make the elemental system clean.
No.
We can't make it super functional, so we just have to include as many fallbacks and safeguards as we can for players so that they don't just get screwed.
Yeah.
And you really feel that. Like, the elemental system is such an awesome idea that has nothing to do with this game that they crammed into it and then built everything else around it. And you're like, why? Fucking...
Yeah, it does. It has always kind of felt like it was this intricate idea. And again, we already said it was ambitious. And then rather than even dropping it off halfway completed, they just rushed it like they were trying to turn it in the night before.
They rushed it, and they fixed it by saying, hey, you can run from every battle, so if you're not prepared, run, go get other stuff, and then come back. That's not a fix.
Yeah.
And so it ends up being this really inconsistent experience. Every now and then, the elemental system just kind of works, and you see the genius of it. You're like, this is such an awesome idea.
Yeah, it's a really clever idea, and it does shake up what we are used to in JRPGs.
And a thing I like about it is that it means every combat, you're basically firing off elements nonstop. Also, and we didn't even mention this, at the end of combat, if you have any elemental juice left over, you can heal your party members, and all of your elements reset for the next battle. So what this means is every battle, except for items, you are going all out. You're casting your biggest stuff every combat, and that feels good in a JRPG to be like, hey man, I'm going to jump in here and just fucking hammer them with my biggest shit every combat, every time, because why not? You get them every battle, and that's
you
cool.
Get that far up on the element grid anyway, if the enemies don't die early enough.
And so that's really cool. But the flip side of that is that physical attacks do almost nothing.
Yeah.
Until physical the very end of the game when you get a couple of good items.
Right.
And that means that you cannot button press your way through these items or through these combats because you need to be casting elements. And casting elements takes effort because if you're just mashing the element button, they're going to stack up the field in their color and crush you out.
Until you get to New Game Plus. And then suddenly the regular bullshit attacks that were useless the whole first game can carry you the entire game. And you stop using elements now that you finally have enough elements to do cool things, and they are no longer necessary, and also the battles don't last long enough to really implement them anyway.
It just feels, again, there are moments, and this is so indicative of my Chrono Cross experience as a whole, where there are moments where you get this glimpse of some genius ideas. You're like, this upends the genre. This is an incredibly innovative, cool idea. And then right after that, you're like, oh, now that idea fucking sucks. And it fluctuates back and forth between like ideas being so cool and you being like, what the fuck were they thinking? Just nonstop.
It just feels like they were incredibly clever, but implemented these clever ideas in the stupidest possible ways sometimes.
I would love to see this game's combat and gameplay system with 6 more months of development and balancing and QA. I would love to play that game.
I mean, when you think about it, this was back in the era when Square especially was pumping out these massive 60-hour JRPGs every 6 to 9 months.
Yeah. And again, they did put it in, and I feel like I'm bitching about the safeguards, the being able to run from every battle, which I'm convinced was a safety valve.
Right.
It helps alleviate it a little bit. It does. But it shines a light on the fact that they didn't really plan very well for how the elemental system is going to work out in practice with 45 fucking characters. They just didn't think about it, or they didn't have time, or they were just like, I don't know, make it so they can run from every battle. So if you get in a battle, you just fucking run away. Like, for an idea as cool and smart as the stamina system. Stamina system is such an awesome idea to then go, oh no, maybe you run for every battle. It's like they had these great ideas and then they needed to go to lunch. So they're like, you run for everything. Let's go.
I feel like each of the, and I found nothing that actually backs this up. This is just me talking out my ass, but it feels like each of the big ideas in this game, like the elements grid and the massive number of characters and the stamina gauge and the all that shit, and also the field, the elemental field meter and all that stuff. It feels like all of these really clever ideas were come up with by completely different people who didn't know the same language as the other people.
Yeah, it's like everyone's. It feels like they broke everyone up and were like, all right, do this group work, and then we're going to come together. And they're like, oh man, these are 8 really great ideas. They're all one thing now. And then someone went, what do you mean they're one thing? And they went, yeah, they're just one thing now. We're going to smash them all together. You know, I mean, like.
Have you ever seen somebody put like 4 different colors of Play-Doh together? It'll be that.
And then you mix it too much and it's gray. We need to be done. So we're going to be done.
Okay.
And we will continue
That's
this.
all of it. Oh, right. We're going to continue it.
There's so much more. There's so much more, Saturn. We haven't even talked about the story.
There's a story?
I'm sure the story. So I want to say this because I feel like I knew going into this episode, I'm going to be a little all over the place, and it's going to be hard for people to understand how I feel about this game. And let me just alleviate that by saying I don't know how I feel about this game.
Yeah.
From a gameplay perspective, when it is good, it's really good and interesting. And when it is bad, it feels like you could have made a better game. It's just incongruent. It's uneven.
It's a weird
peaks and valleys.
We'll get to our actual thoughts on the game in the next episode. Though.
But just on the gameplay, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
But what's not all over the place is our Patreon. You can go to our Patreon, and
it's in one place.
It's a lot of great ideas that mesh together perfectly.
Everything the great Play-Doh of Patreon.
Everything goes together great. This is awesome. You can get uncut versions of the show. You can get Talking Wizards. You can get Read Along, where we read magazines to you. You know, if you want someone to read a story to you before you go to bed, then you can.
We don't actually do that. We just read gaming magazines.
Yeah, no, but it's the same thing. But
it's basically the same.
It's like Goodnight Moon. You know, it's got.
Maybe you wanted to read Goodnight Moon, or maybe you wanted to hear some guys make fun of an advertisement from 1996.
We want to thank the following patrons, starting with Chris Courage
and Christopher Britt,
Ed Webb,
EMD,
4E Care,
Frank Grimes,
or Grimy as I call him. I'm sure that person is not sick of that joke.
I'm sure
they've never gotten tired of that one. That was the Simpsons guy, right? Was his name Frank Grimes? It was, right? All right, make sure I remember right. So people know what the fuck I'm talking about.
Also, The Simpsons was a TV show. It aired like 25, 30 years ago. It still airs, but that episode aired like 25 or 30 years ago.
Oh, I'm old. I'm sorry. Whose turn was it? I'll go. Grover and Simba.
John Fry.
Jordan Eash.
And Kim Pellet.
Are all the patrons we want to thank for their kind donations that they give to us monthly. Every month. They're like, here's some money for not understanding Chrono Cross. Look, these guys, Justin's obviously dumb enough that he needs the money more than I do. Let me send him some cash so that maybe he can figure out the elemental grid. He doesn't seem to be capable of these things.
I'm going to send him some cash to endorse his 4-day speed run of complicated JRPGs.
I did, man. I think it was it was 30 hours in 4 days, I think is what I crammed out. I believe that's. At least
the new version unlocks fast forward automatically. You don't have to beat the game first.
I was breakneck speed. I finished it at like 1 o'clock in the morning and had an existential crisis and went to bed. Anyway, please tune in next week. We're going to talk about the
existential crisis.
The existential crisis that is Chrono Cross.
Yes.
And spoiler, I have a lot of the same feelings about the story as I do about the gameplay. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. Yes. And as always, let us cling together.